My homeowners association decided their power didn't stop at the community pool or the color of their residents' mailboxes. They believed it extended to my private, exempt land. They cloaked their avarice in the language of the greater good when they tried to strong-arm me into selling, but I knew it was just a naked power grab. What they didn't know is that my family has owned this land for generations, and my father, a wise and cautious man, had buried a secret deep in the county records, a legal time bomb that would bring their entire arrogant scheme crashing down around them. My family has owned this land for over 100 years. It's more than just dirt and trees to me. It's a living testament to our history, a legacy written in soil and stone. We're talking about a sprawling 100-acre piece of rolling hills and dense Virginia forest, with a creek that cuts right through the middle, whispering stories of generations past. My great-grandfather, a man who believed in the value of something real you could stand on, bought it with every penny he had saved. My grandfather, with his own 2 hands, built his home on it, a sturdy house that still stands as a monument to his hard work. And my father, a man of quiet wisdom, taught me how to fish in that very creek, not just for trout, but for patience and perspective. The house I live in now, the one where my wife and I raised our children and filled the walls with laughter and memories, sits on a 10-acre piece of that original 100. The other 90 acres? Well, that's my sanctuary. It's my private retreat, my gym, my church, my connection to the past, and, I had always assumed, my undisputed property. The deed is ironclad, a document that has passed from hand to hand through my family, its language firm and absolute. The boundaries have been surveyed and marked for generations, respected by all our neighbors. It was never for sale. It was never going to be for sale. It's the kind of place you pass down, not sell off, a repository of our collective soul. It's not just land, it's our story, written in the rings of ancient oak trees and the familiar contours of the land. It's the one constant that has anchored my family through wars, recessions, and the relentless march of time. About 15 years ago, the relentless march of time showed up in a new suit, carrying a briefcase. A developer came calling. He saw the rolling fields adjacent to our property and envisioned a picture-perfect subdivision, a place of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. To make his grand vision a reality, he needed access, and the only logical, cost-effective path was through a sliver of my family's land. My father, who was still alive then, was a man rooted in tradition and had no interest in selling. He cherished the privacy and the untamed nature of our land. But he was also a reasonable man. He understood that progress, as they call it, was inevitable, and that new neighbors were coming whether he liked it or not. So, after much deliberation and legal counsel, a deal was struck. It was a compromise born of pragmatism. My father granted an easement, a legal right-of-way, so the developer could build an entrance road to the future community. In exchange for this concession, the developer and the homeowners association he would later form were to be solely responsible for the road's construction and perpetual upkeep. The heart of that agreement, a document recorded with solemn finality in the county courthouse and physically attached to our deed, was a simple but powerful clause insisted upon by my father's shrewd lawyer. Our remaining 90 acres were explicitly, unequivocally, and perpetually exempt from the new HOA, its rules, its fees, and its authority. We were granting passage, not membership. We were to be neighbors, not subjects. That was the deal. For over a decade, that deal held firm. The development, which they christened with the ironically pastoral name Whispering Pines, sprung up from the neighboring fields. Houses were built, families moved in, and an HOA was formed to manage the common areas, the community pool, and the pristine asphalt of the entrance road that cut through what was once our hayfield. We coexisted peacefully. They had their community with its meticulously crafted rules, and I had my land with its wild, natural freedom. A clear line, both on the map and in our mutual understanding, separated their world from mine, or so I thought. The trouble started, as it so often does, not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of paper. An official HOA letter, printed on heavy bond with the Whispering Pines logo embossed at the top, arrived in my mailbox. It was framed as a courtesy notice. The grass and wildflowers along the edge of my property, where my 90 acres of natural woodland met their immaculately manicured entrance road, were apparently too high. It was, according to the letter, detracting from the community's aesthetic standards and a potential fire hazard. I read it, let out a short, sharp laugh, and tossed it onto the pile of junk mail. My land is a forest, a nature preserve of my own making, not some suburbanite's fantasy of a perfect lawn. The very idea that I was supposed to mow the edge of a thriving woodland to their sterile golf course standards was just absurd. We clearly had vastly different definitions of aesthetic. A few weeks later, a second letter arrived. This one wasn't so courteous. The tone had shifted from feigned politeness to bureaucratic aggression. It cited a specific violation of community bylaws that didn't apply to me, and formally levied a $50 fine. This time, I didn't laugh. That's when I first met Brenda. She was the newly elected president of the Whispering Pines HOA, a woman who seemed to have found her life's true calling in the rigorous enforcement of neighborhood covenants. I saw her one Saturday morning standing on the edge of the road, her minivan parked haphazardly on the shoulder. She was holding her phone up, taking pictures of my property line. I decided it was time for a neighborly chat and walked over to introduce myself. She didn't smile. Her face was a mask of stern disapproval. "You must be the owner of this parcel," she said, her tone dripping with a peculiar disdain, as if the word land was too grubby for her vocabulary and parcel was a term of diminishment. "I am," I replied, keeping my voice even. "And I got your letter. And your fine." "Good," she snapped, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the tree line. "Then you know the grass is a clear violation. And that dead tree over there." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger towards a magnificent, lightning-scarred oak that stood about 30 feet into my woods. "It's an eyesore and a hazard. It needs to come down immediately." I was stunned into a moment of silence by her sheer audacity. "Brenda, with all due respect, this is my private property. It is not part of your HOA. My family's agreement is for the road easement, and that's it. My land is not subject to your rules about grass height or my own perfectly fine dead trees." She scoffed, a little puff of air that was pure, unadulterated condescension. "The entrance to our prestigious community runs directly through your property. The appearance of that entryway reflects on all of us. It critically affects our property values. You have a responsibility to the community." "My only responsibility concerning this road is to not block it," I said, my patience beginning to fray at the edges. "What I do on my land, with my trees and my grass, is my business." She gave me a look that I would come to know well over the following months, a look that expertly combined pity with righteous contempt. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel and marching back toward her perfectly landscaped corner lot, the epitome of the very aesthetic she sought to impose on my wild woods. That conversation was the first shot in what became a grueling 2-year war of attrition. The fines began to pile up with methodical regularity. $50 for the grass became $100 after I failed to remedy the situation. Then came a separate $200 fine for the hazardous dead oak tree. Then another $150 fine for unmanaged undergrowth, which was their term for the natural forest floor. They sent a notice about a fallen log near the creek, claiming it was a potential habitat for vermin and reptiles. Each letter was more aggressive than the last, stuffed with legal-sounding jargon and thinly veiled threats of further action. These were classic intimidation tactics designed to wear me down and bleed me dry. The harassment soon became more creative and personal. One afternoon, I came home to find a man with a tripod and surveying equipment setting up on the entrance road. It was a surveyor, hired by the HOA, he sheepishly admitted, to confirm the boundary lines. They were questioning the very markers that had defined my family's land for a century. It was a blatant power play, an attempt to sow doubt and imply that my claim to my own property was somehow shaky. Then came the drone. I was sitting by the creek one morning, enjoying the quiet, when I heard a high-pitched buzzing. I looked up to see a small drone hovering over the trees, its camera lens pointed directly at me. It followed me as I walked back toward my house. It was a gross invasion of privacy, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Brenda was no longer just taking pictures from the road. She was conducting aerial surveillance of my private sanctuary, looking for anything she could twist into a violation. The absurdity peaked with their complaints about the wildlife. I received a letter from the Community Standards Committee, a body I was certain consisted of Brenda and two of her closest allies, complaining about deer from my property eating their prize-winning roses. They had the gall to suggest I was responsible for the behavior of wild animals and demanded I look into fencing all 90 acres to contain the nuisance. They were living in a development named Whispering Pines and were complaining about nature itself. Responded to the first few official fines, mailing them certified letters containing copies of the original easement agreement and the deed. I highlighted the exemption clause in bright yellow, explaining calmly and rationally that they had no jurisdiction. Their response? A new fine for failure to comply with board directives. It was like arguing with a petty, bureaucratic brick wall that had appointed itself sovereign. The selective enforcement was what truly stoked my anger. While I was getting fined for a historic tree that was part of the natural landscape, one of the board members had a broken-down jet ski sitting on a trailer in his driveway for 6 months, a clear and obvious violation of their own rules. Another board member had unapproved political signs in his yard for weeks after an election. No letters for them, though. Their power wasn't a standard to be upheld. It was a weapon to be aimed at those they disliked. Most of the other residents in Whispering Pines were just living their lives, happy to let the HOA handle the neighborhood's business. A few, however, started to notice the board's escalating obsession with my property. One neighbor, a quiet but observant guy named Tom, caught me by my mailbox one afternoon. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice as if Brenda might have bugs planted in the petunias. "I was at the board meeting last night. You should know they spent almost half an hour talking about your land." "Let me guess," I sighed. "The grass is still too long?" "Worse," Tom said, his expression serious. "Brenda and the board are building a formal case against you. They're using your refusal to pay the fines as evidence of hostile non-compliance. They're saying your unmanaged property is a drag on home values and a safety risk. They used the word blight and said they need to explore all available options to resolve the problem you represent." That was a huge escalation. Blight is a powerful and dangerous legal term. It's a word municipalities and powerful entities use to justify aggressive actions, sometimes even eminent domain. This was no longer about grass. It was never about grass. This was about control, and ultimately about taking the land. The final straw came about 6 months into this waking nightmare. I received a certified letter, the kind that makes your stomach clench. Inside wasn't just another fine, but a formal notice. The HOA's attorney, on behalf of the board, intended to place a lien on my property for the accumulated, unpaid, and completely illegitimate fines, which now totaled over $5,000. A lien is a serious threat. It's a legal claim, a black mark against your property for a debt. If they succeeded, I couldn't sell my land, not that I ever wanted to, or even refinance my home without paying them off first. In some extreme cases, An HOA can even foreclose on a property to satisfy a lien. This letter was a declaration of war. They weren't just trying to bully me into mowing my lawn anymore. They were trying to manufacture a legal claim to my land. They were trying to manage me right off it. The letter gave me 30 days to pay the full amount, or they would proceed with filing the lien at the county courthouse. They thought they had me backed into a corner. They thought I would finally cave, perhaps even get desperate enough to sell them the land they so clearly coveted, just to make the incessant harassment stop. That's when I knew I had to fight back, not just with letters, but with fire. This was a calculated attack on my family's legacy, and I was not going to let them win. That lion notice was a shock to the system. It's one thing to receive nasty letters from a power-tripping board president, but it's a whole other level of aggression when they weaponize the legal system to make a claim against your property. My first reaction was pure, hot anger. I paced my workshop for an hour. The threatening letter crumpled in my fist. But once that initial rage faded, it was replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They had made a huge, monumental mistake. They had underestimated my resolve and, more importantly, they had underestimated my deep ancestral connection to that land. I wasn't just going to get a lawyer. I was going to find the best damn property lawyer in the Commonwealth of Virginia. My search led me to Mr. Robert Davies, a seasoned attorney in his late 60s, with a formidable reputation as a bulldog in the courtroom and a walking encyclopedia of Virginia property law. His office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with floors that creaked with history. The rooms were lined with towering shelves of law books that smelled of old paper, leather, and authority. He wasn't one of those flashy lawyers from TV commercials with a slick smile and an 800 number. He was quiet, thoughtful, and when he listened, he truly heard you. I laid out the entire sordid history on his large mahogany desk. The growing stack of violation notices, the increasingly threatening letters, the photos I'd taken of Brenda's husband trespassing, the video from my phone of the drone hovering over my creek. Finally, I placed the certified letter threatening the lien in the center of the pile like a dead scorpion. I also brought the most important documents of all, the original deed for the 100 acres and the easement agreement my father had signed 15 years ago. Davies put on his half-moon reading glasses and spent a long, silent time examining the documents. He didn't skim. He read every word of the easement, his finger tracing the lines of text as if he were deciphering an ancient map. He held the deed up to the light, studying the signatures and the notary seals, giving the paper a respect I deeply appreciated. "Well," he finally said, looking at me over the rim of his glasses, "you have a classic textbook case of HOA overreach. Aggressive enforcement, selective application of their own rules, blatant intimidation. It's all here. But the lien threat is a particularly dangerous and, frankly, stupid move on their part. In Virginia, an HOA can place liens for unpaid assessments, but those assessments have to be legitimate. They must stem from covenants that actually apply to your property." "And they don't," I stated, more as a confirmation than a question. "The easement agreement is crystal clear. My 90 acres are exempt." "Precisely," Davies agreed, tapping the document. "Their jurisdiction stops where your private property begins. They are acting far outside the scope of their own governing documents. This isn't just overreach. This is a potential breach of their fiduciary duty to their members. They're spending the association's money, their neighbors' money, to fund a personal vendetta against a non-member." He leaned back in his creaking leather chair. "We can fight this, and we will. The standard procedure would be to send a sharply worded cease and desist letter from my office. We can get an injunction from a judge to stop them from filing the lien, and we could sue them for harassment and damages. We would very likely win." "But," he paused, a thoughtful, strategic look appearing on his face, "a purely defensive strategy might not solve the real problem. The problem is a board president who believes her power is limitless and who clearly has designs on your land. Even if we win this round, she'll just find another way to come after you. We don't just need a shield to defend ourselves. We need a sword, something that ends this permanently. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. What kind of sword? Your father was a very smart man, Davies said, picking up the easement agreement again. He had the foresight to put in the exemption clause. That's our shield. But I wonder what else is lurking in the history of this land. These old family parcels that get subdivided, sometimes you find interesting relics in the old deeds and filings. Covenants, conditions, maybe even a reversionary clause. That word hung in the air, full of unknown potential. A what clause? Davies explained that a reversionary clause is a condition written into a deed that can cause the ownership of the property to revert or go back to the original owner or their heirs if a specific condition is broken. For example, he said, land is granted to a city so long as it is used as a public park. If the city then tries to build a shopping mall on it, the land could revert to the family that originally granted it. He was quick to warn me that they're rare and that courts scrutinize them very strictly. Because it's such a drastic remedy. You think there might be something like that in my family's deeds? I asked, a flicker of hope igniting. It's a long shot, Davies admitted honestly. A real long shot. But given their unbridled aggression, it's a shot worth taking. Let's go to the county courthouse. Let's pull every single deed, plat map, survey, and filing associated with your 100 acres and the creation of Whispering Pines. Let's see exactly what the developer promised your father to get him to sign on that dotted line. And so we did. For the next 2 weeks, Davies and I became fixtures at the Buckingham County Records Office. We descended into the dusty archives, digging through musty, leather-bound deed books and squinting at grainy microfilm. We traced the land's history from my great-grandfather's initial purchase all the way to the complex deal my father made with the developer. We hit several dead ends and spent hours poring over boilerplate legal language. I was starting to lose hope. And then, buried not in the main deed, but in a separate, multi-page addendum to the original easement grant, Davies found it. He had been meticulously reading a dense section titled Covenants and Conditions of Grant. He suddenly went very still. "My God," he whispered, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. He slid the heavy book across the table, pointing to a dense paragraph. Here it is. It was a reversionary clause, but a very specific and absolutely brilliant one. My father's lawyer had been a quiet genius. The clause didn't apply to the land the houses were built on. It applied directly and solely to the easement, the strip of land that constituted the entrance road. The clause stated, in no uncertain terms, that the right-of-way for the road was granted for so long as the developer and its successors, which explicitly named the future HOA, did not interfere with, harass, financially burden, or attempt to claim authority over the grantor's remaining private, non-associated lands. If the HOA breached this condition and failed to rectify the breach within 90 days of receiving a formal written notice from the grantor or his heirs, the easement would be declared null and void, and full and unencumbered ownership of the road itself would automatically revert to the grantor's estate. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum. What does this mean exactly? A slow, triumphant grin spread across Davies's face. It means your father loaded a gun, put it in this file 15 years ago, and trusted that you'd be smart enough to find it if you ever needed it. This, my friend, is our sword. This is the nuclear option. He was quick to temper my excitement with a dose of legal reality. Now, it's not as simple as me giving a speech and the road suddenly becoming yours, he cautioned. A clause this powerful, this devastating, doesn't just execute itself, even if the language says automatically revert. The HOA's lawyers will fight it tooth and nail. They'll claim it's invalid, archaic, or unenforceable. To truly enforce it, we'd have to file what's called a quiet title lawsuit and get a judge to officially order the reversion of the title. It would be a messy, long, and very expensive battle. My face must have fallen, because he quickly held up a hand. But, and this is the beautiful part, we don't have to win that battle in court. We just have to show them, their lawyers, and most importantly, their title insurance companies, that we can and will fight it. The second we file that lawsuit, it creates a massive cloud on the title of every single home in that development. The threat of you taking back their only road in and out, their only legal access, that's a weapon of immense power. It's checkmate. This was our strategy. We were no longer on the defensive. We were going on the attack. We would meticulously draft a formal notice of breach, as required by the clause, detailing every single instance of their coordinated harassment. We'd demand they drop the fines, cease all contact, formally apologize, that Brenda resign in disgrace, and that they legally acknowledge the power of the clause. If they refused to meet every single one of our demands, we would file a lawsuit to quiet title and void their easement, effectively landlocking the entire neighborhood of Whispering Pines. A wave of profound vindication washed over me. It was perfect. It was poetic. My father, years after his passing, had left me the ultimate defense. The HOA, in their arrogant and greedy pursuit of my property, had been sawing off the very branch they were sitting on. With our nuclear option identified and ready, Mr. Davies and I prepared our counteroffensive. This wasn't going to be a simple, angry letter. This was going to be a precise, surgical legal maneuver. Adhering strictly to the protocol laid out in the reversionary clause, Davies drafted a formidable 20-page formal notice of breach. We didn't just send it to the HOA's general counsel. We sent a copy via certified mail, return receipt requested, to the personal home address of every single member of the Whispering Pines HOA Board of Directors. We wanted to make sure Brenda and her cronies couldn't claim they never saw it. The document was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It began with a narrative, recounting my family's century-long history with the land. It then laid out, in excruciating detail, every act of harassment, every baseless fine, every trespass, and every threat, complete with dates, times, and photographic evidence. It methodically built the case that the HOA, under the direct leadership of Brenda, had engaged in a sustained and malicious campaign of intimidation and illegal coercion in direct violation of not only our private agreement, but also the Virginia Property Owners Association Act. Then came the hammer. The notice included a high-resolution, certified copy of the deed addendum, with the reversionary clause highlighted, transcribed, and explained in plain, simple English so no one could possibly misunderstand it. It spelled out in cold, hard terms that their campaign of harassment had breached the one singular condition that guaranteed the legal existence of their only access road. The final pages contained our list of non-negotiable demands. We didn't ask. We told them what was going to happen. Immediate and permanent withdrawal of all fines, fees, and violation notices against me or my property. Immediate and permanent cancellation of the threatened lien proceedings. A formal, written apology from the board for their illegal actions, to be read aloud in its entirety at the next general meeting of the homeowners. The immediate and non-negotiable resignation of Brenda from her position as president and from the board of directors, along with any other board member who actively participated in the harassment campaign. The board must sign and record a new legal instrument, drafted by Davies, permanently and publicly acknowledging the validity and power of the reversionary clause. They were given 90 days to comply in full. The letter concluded by stating that if all demands were not met by the deadline, we would, on the 91st day, file suit in the Circuit Court of Buckingham County to have the easement for Whispering Pines Drive declared null and void, thereby terminating all legal access to their development. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 solid weeks there was nothing. No letters, no calls. Then my neighbor Tom called me. his voice a hurried whisper. An emergency, board-only, closed-door meeting had been called. The rumor mill in the neighborhood was churning, with whispers of a legal crisis and serious financial exposure. About 3 weeks after our letters went out, I received a thick, heavy envelope from a prestigious law firm in Richmond. It was the HOA's official response. The letter was mostly bluster and legalistic posturing, a transparent attempt to save face. It accused me of bad faith extortion, misinterpreting a vestigial and likely unenforceable clause, and disrupting community harmony. But buried deep within the panicked legal jargon was the one sentence that mattered. Without admitting any validity whatsoever to your dubious claims or the applicability of the cited clause, the board is willing to discuss a potential resolution to this matter. Davies let out a hearty laugh when he read it. "They're terrified," he said with satisfaction. "Their lawyers know the clause is real. They've looked it up at the courthouse, and now they're in full-blown panic mode. They know a quiet title action on their only access road would be catastrophic. No one in that neighborhood could sell or refinance their home while that lawsuit is tied up in court. Title insurance companies would run for the hills. They simply cannot risk it. We agreed to a meeting, but on our terms, not theirs. We rejected their offer of a private meeting with their lawyers. Our counteroffer was simple: an open general meeting for all homeowners. The board had created this mess in the name of the community, so the entire community deserved to hear the unvarnished truth. Reluctantly, and with their backs against the wall, they agreed. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed to the rafters. The air was thick with tension and confusion. Brenda and the rest of the board sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking grim and defensive. Brenda tried to control the narrative, opening the meeting by framing the situation as a simple boundary disagreement with a non-member neighbor that had been regrettably blown out of proportion. She attempted to paint me as an unreasonable recluse, unwilling to be a good neighbor. Then she made the mistake of giving the floor to Mr. Davies. Davies walked to the podium, projecting an aura of calm, professorial authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He started by telling my family's story, how we had been stewards of that land long before Whispering Pines was even a blueprint. Then, with devastating precision, he dismantled the board's entire case. He used a projector to display copies of the ridiculous violation notices on a large screen for everyone to see. The homeowners started murmuring. Fining a man for having a forest next to his forest was clearly absurd to them now that it was laid bare. He showed them the trespassing photos and the drone footage. Then he put up the lien notice, explaining in detail how the board had used homeowner funds to pursue an illegal and unwinnable claim against a non-member. The mood in the room soured rapidly, shifting from confusion to palpable anger. These people were realizing their own money had been wasted on Brenda's personal vendetta. Finally, Davies projected a crystal-clear image of the reversionary clause for all to see. "This," he said, his voice filling the now deadly silent room, "is a condition from the original deed grant that established the road you all use every single day. It is the very foundation of your legal access. It explicitly forbids the HOA from harassing the owner of the neighboring property. This board, led by Ms. Brenda, has knowingly, repeatedly, and maliciously violated this core condition. As a direct result of their actions, they have jeopardized your legal right to get to and from your own homes." Panic rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Shouts erupted. "What does that mean? Is he serious?" The HOA's lawyer, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, jumped up and tried to do damage control, sputtering about the clause being archaic and having questionable enforceability. Davies let him finish his flustered speech, then calmly turned to the crowd and asked a simple question. "Ask your lawyer this," Davies said, pointing at the panicked attorney. If I file a lawsuit tomorrow to enforce this clause, will your title insurance still cover you when you try to sell your house? Will any bank give you a mortgage to buy a home in a neighborhood that might lose its only road? The lawyer had no answer. He couldn't answer. He just sat down, defeated. That was the moment the dam broke. The homeowners turned on the board with a fury. They were furious that their own leadership had been so reckless, so arrogant, that they had gambled away the entire community's stability and financial security. Brenda tried to defend her actions, claiming she was only protecting property values. But she was drowned out by a chorus of angry questions and calls for her immediate resignation. The meeting fell into utter chaos for the board. By the end of the night, it was clear they had lost all authority, all credibility, and all support. In the week that followed, the board completely and utterly capitulated. An email announced Brenda's resignation, effective immediately, for personal reasons. Two of her closest allies on the board followed suit. The fines and violation notices vanished from my record. A formal, if rather stiff, letter of apology was delivered to my door. And most importantly, the new legal instrument, the Declaration of Clarification, acknowledging the reversionary clause for all time, was signed, notarized, and recorded at the county courthouse, a permanent public record and a warning to all future boards. The war was over. I had won. The peace that returned to my land was profound. It was the quiet hum of the woods, uninterrupted by drones or the snap of a camera. My sanctuary was safe. This was more than just a personal victory. It was a victory for anyone who has ever felt bullied or pushed around by an overreaching HOA. They count on you being too intimidated or too tired to fight back. They bet on you not knowing your rights. If my story resonates with you, if you believe in standing up for your property and your legacy, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe for more stories about fighting for your rights, and please share your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. Let's make sure no one has to fight these battles alone. In the end, my HOA's aggressive attempt to manage me right off my own land failed spectacularly. Their greed, their arrogance, and their lust for control were their undoing. They forgot a fundamental truth. You have to respect the boundaries, both the ones on the map and the ones written in the law. They foolishly believed my land's history was irrelevant, just a collection of old stories and faded papers. They were wrong. That history, buried deep in the county records, turned out to be my greatest weapon. I learned that when you're fighting for your home and your family's legacy, you have to be willing to dig deep, stand your ground, and meet fire with fire. They picked a fight with the wrong family, and the only thing they managed to do was manage themselves right out of power, leaving me, my family, and my 100 acres of Virginia forest in peace at last.